Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Kailey, Leinz in Washington, where it has been an exhausting couple of days as lawmakers have been racing to beat the clock, which runs out just about 11 hours from now. They have until midnight tonight to avert a government shutdown, or at the very least, a technical one, as we are heading into a weekend. And of course, there's a lot of voices at play. There's what House leadership wants, led, of course, by the Speaker, Mike Johnson. Then there's what Donald Trump, the president-elect, and Elon Musk, who's coming in to help lead the Department of Government Efficiency, want to see, including, apparently, a lifting of the debt ceiling. But it's unclear whether or not that can get through on this day of days. In fact, what we understand House leadership is talking about is breaking up a package that failed on the House floor last night with 38 Republicans voting against it into multiple parts, perhaps easier to digest for lawmakers who were reluctant to vote for the whole thing. But a Republican conference meeting is underway as we speak, so we want to get more details on what exactly we know and turn to Bloomberg Politics editor Laura Davison. So, Laura, obviously, this has been a fast-moving story. It's literally changing as we speak. At this hour, where do we stand?
So House Republicans are literally in a room right now. Mike Johnson, the Speaker, is going through the options of what they can do. And what that looks like is having separate votes on sort of the key elements of the bill. So one, just a straight bill to extend current levels of government funding through March, $100 billion for disaster aid. That's exceptionally important for people in North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, who have said that they are not going to vote for this bill unless that is part of the mix, as well as a farm aid, also important for a lot of different states. The question is, will there be a vote on this debt ceiling piece? This is really where Republicans in Congress and Donald Trump are really at odds. And we saw that play out last night when that bill really failed spectacularly on the floor. Republicans in Congress don't want to deal with this right now. It is clear there is not the votes to do what Trump wants to do. He originally said he thought a 2-year suspension of the debt ceiling was good. Then he came back at 1 o'clock in the morning and said, how about 4 years? Then that's it's not really how the negotiation works. Theoretically, he should be moving in the opposite direction. So this is really going to be a test of will for him. Is he going to say, no, seriously, guys, this is what we're doing? Or does he back down and avoid what will be a very chaotic to the start of his presidency, a Christmas week shutdown, which really doesn't look good for anyone in this process?
Well, it also becomes a question of how Mike Johnson is going to navigate this with the president-elect. Is he willing to defy Trump's wishes when he knows he has to abide not just by them, but also what Elon Musk wants, also what the will of his Republican conference is, knowing he wants to still be gavel in hand in the 119th Congress. He has to stand for re-election as Speaker in just a few weeks.
Yeah, and we saw, Trump say, look, Mike Johnson can keep his job if he's, quote, tough. What does tough mean? Tough generally means that you're defending whatever Trump wants to get done, which is not what Johnson's members want to get done. So he's in a really tough spot. And this is really where we found, most Republican speakers, in the past, decade or so. Mm-hmm. It's these spending fights that really test their ability. This kind of fight is what ultimately led to Kevin McCarthy's ouster. Yeah. And so this is where you're going to see, Mike Johnson, does he, where does his priority lie? Is it staying loyal to Trump? Is it making sure to keep his members happy and sort of providing that top cover for members of Congress who don't want this? Or is it keeping his job? Probably not all of those things are going to be possible.
Well, especially when you consider that the House is only one part of this equation. This has to be a package ultimately that can get through the Senate and be signed into law by President Biden for a shutdown to be averted. Where are the Democrats in this conversation right now? Because their first bipartisan agreement died. They had nothing to do with what failed on the House floor last night. Are they at the table now?
So as of just a couple hours ago, there was at least conversations between House Republicans and House Democrats. Hakeem Jeffries says that they're at the table. They're talking. What that deal ultimately looks like and what can come to pass isn't clear. It's not clear that House Republicans even really have their preferred path forward yet. Johnson is in the room presenting options to members, not here's what we're going to do, which really just signals, it's less than 12 hours until a shutdown. Mm-hmm. The risk of a shutdown just increases every little bit. And whether this is a short-term thing, it's not a huge deal. But if this turns into a multi-day or multi-week situation, this is going to be not bode well for Republicans getting things like taxes or immigration or all of their big policy priorities done in 2025.
It's a good reminder, though, that even if this does lapse beyond midnight, it takes them the weekend to figure this out, because it is a weekend. You aren't necessarily going to feel any dramatic impacts of a shutdown right away.
Correct.
All right, Bloomberg's Laura Davison, Bloomberg politics editor, keeping busy as we keep track of all of the news here from Washington. Much appreciated. And we want to turn next to someone who spent many days in the halls of Congress dealing with battles like this one. He is former Republican Congressman from Texas and former chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. Kevin Brady is joining me now. He's now spokesperson for the Alliance for Competitive Taxation. Congressman, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and Radio. It's always good to have you, sir. And I know that what's going on Capitol Hill probably isn't all too surprising to you given history, but I do still wonder what you make of the events of the last several days.
So one, it is great to see you again. Thank you so much. Secondly, yes, I've lived these hours many times. And I think, one thing that sticks out is that I think both President Trump and Elon Musk, who have very strong support among Republicans in the House, I think are learning what Speaker Johnson's challenges are. There are 220 plus Republicans. They are smart and hardworking. They understand the issues. And, you've got to find a way if you're going to unite them. You got to find the right policies that do that. And certainly that's what the speaker is trying to do in that conference meeting as we speak. There may be a technical shutdown. I don't foresee any lengthy one at all. Republicans are working toward keeping this government open. One, because they don't want the distraction heading into President Trump's inauguration. They are moving fast because they're determined not to make the mistakes of 2017 where they feel squandered the first 6 or 7 months of President Trump's first term. Now they're moving. And secondly, the Republicans have learned that if you shut the government down, you just abdicate the power of the purse. You give more power to the existing president to decide which agencies are open, which are not, which workers are essential, which are not. And so clearly that's not something Republicans want to do at a time. Not everyone's sure, how this government's running right now.
Well, I wonder what you make, sir, of specifically the request of Donald Trump that is raise the debt ceiling until I'm out of office or just abolish it entirely. Does that make sense to you, especially knowing the tax reform that Donald Trump would like to pursue shortly after he takes office?
Well, I think Republicans have long believed that the debt ceiling, as dramatic and theatrical as it sometimes is, which isn't always helpful, that's been where history shows the most progress has been made in creating some fiscal responsibility. And so Republicans have traditionally believed there should be some type of debt ceiling, some type of trigger that forces Congress, to pretty regularly look at the financial condition of the country and the government and try to find a path forward. So that was going to be a very, very tough lift in the best of circumstances. But there are many Republicans, House and Senate, who've never voted for a debt ceiling bill. If they have, it's been with significant spending cuts. That wasn't part of that proposal at all last night. And so I think this is a chance again for the president and Elon Musk on the saving side of this to really sit down internally, work with the incoming class of Republicans, because I think the field in 2025 where they hold the House and Senate is so much better field to fight on than the one they have right now where Democrats run the Senate and the White House.
All right, former Congressman Kevin Brady, I do want to get to what this future Congress is going to look like with you. If you wouldn't mind sitting tight for just a few minutes, we would greatly appreciate your patience because we do want to go live to Capitol Hill. Joining us from his office right now is Democratic Senator Mark Warner of Virginia. Sir, thank you so much for your time on what is obviously a very busy week in Washington. As it stands now, with the reporting we have out of the House about their proposed path forward, splitting a bill up essentially into a number of different ones to be voted on, can this shutdown be avoided? Can your chamber vote on this before midnight tonight?
Well, first of all, we have seen, I say this is somebody that was in business longer than been in politics. This was incompetence at a spectacular level. I'm looking forward to working with Donald Trump where I can, but he prides himself on art of the deal. There was days and days, and I believe my Senate Republican friends who are all ready for the deal, I think his team was told. But then to pull the rug out from under the feet of the speaker, is this a preview of what's going to happen over the next 4 years? And with all due respect to your former guest, when I was coming back on, the debt ceiling is, we've already rung up those bills, and it's basically saying, are you going to pay your credit card bill on things you've already expended? So I am concerned. I'm concerned about if we go through this shutdown, the signal it sends to our adversaries around the world. I'm concerned about if, a lot of Bloomberg viewers, I'm sure, going to climb on an airplane in the next few days to go visit family. You got a shutdown with TSA and air traffic controllers not getting paid. This is crazy. And, chopping it up into 3 bits. And it again, as we all know, the idea that some of these extreme members on the House Republican side who are never going to vote for anything, whether it's debt ceiling or a continuing resolution, why they are dictating some of the terms, as a business guy, kind of makes me scratch our head. Last point just is the Senate Republicans, the Senate Democrats, the House Democrats, we were all on the same page. This was a bipartisan agreement, and it does bode poorly for what's coming next.
Well, of course, that bipartisan agreement is no longer on the table. So what messaging have you gotten from your leadership, from Chuck Schumer, as to what the Democrats in the Senate will be willing to vote for here? What is the very lowest bar that you're willing to jump over to avert a shutdown?
If anybody can predict what the House Republicans can pass, particularly if they're going to just try to pass it with their own members, they can't. I mean, the reality is, as people know, there are a whole group of members that will never vote for a continuing resolution. So the notion that you can do this without working with the Democrats is, the math doesn't add up. So remember the Pottery Barn expression, if you break it, you own it. Well, these guys broke it. So let's see what will come out of this afternoon. But to put in jeopardy all of these families right in the holidays who depend upon these paychecks, or the businesses that are adjacent around tourism events that will never get recouped, it is just plain cruel.
Sir, I'd like to ask you as well how you see this being foreboding, or what you think this might signal as to the battle still ahead, specifically in 2025, when there will be expirations of tax cuts that have actually led to more money in the pockets of some of these very same people you are referring to who could be hurt by a shutdown. Given how difficult this funding battle has proven to be, does that suggest to you that Democrats will have to step in to extend those 2017 tax cuts? That it's your votes that will ultimately be required for that to happen?
Let's put it like this. There has, over the last year, I'm not sure there was a single bill that came out of the House that didn't have to have Democrats' help. And listen, I'm part of every bipartisan gang that's taken place. Anything that's happened over the last couple of years in terms of infrastructure or the CHIPS bill, Electoral Count Act, there were a bipartisan group of us that put that together. I think, frankly, that ends up with better legislation, and both parties have to own the good and the bad. And I think, again, with the margin, 1 or 2 the first couple of months in the House, and some people who will find an excuse to vote against anything, I think if they try to do this in a bipartisan way, I want America to stay competitive. I want us to have the best business climate in the world. But the signal this sends, if we go into this shutdown, it's I thought we've all seen this movie many times before, and there may be that final chapter where there's a way out. But this is not a way to govern the greatest country, the most powerful country in the world, and it does make me worried about next year. And again, I say this with somebody who I disagree with President-elect Trump on a number of things, but I'm more than happy to work with him. I probably voted for more of his cabinet nominees last time, and I will vote for many of them this time. So I'm not here to kind of just throw stones at the other side. But gosh, how do you negotiate in good faith with somebody going forward, particularly when I believe that at least the Trump team was aware of what the speaker was doing, if after a handshake, somebody reneges at the 11th hour?
Well, sir, finally, is it really only Donald Trump that will have to be worked with, negotiated with, or do we have to have Elon Musk's name on this list as well as to whose sign-off is going to be required to get any real legislating done?
I have huge respect for Elon Musk's business acumen, but the idea that he is now, outside of his lanes. And I've worked with Elon Musk and want to work with him going forward. I think there's a lot of efficiency that we can bring to the government. But the idea that he's suddenly calling the plays for how the government is going to be funded or not, it'd be like putting me in as the coach for the Washington Commanders. The team would lose and a lot of people would get hurt. So I think we all need to acknowledge we all bring different skill sets to the table. And inefficiency, again, I was a big supporter of Elon Musk a decade ago as he was getting SpaceX up and operating, breaking up in the monopolies that controlled that arena. But I do hope that he understands the power he has. He's got more followers on Twitter than Donald Trump. And candidly, and don't take my word, talk to any Republican, what he was tweeting on, whatever day it was when the deal came out, half of the tweets were just factually not true.
All right, Senator, thank you very much for hopping on to join us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. That was Democratic Senator Mark Warner of Virginia. Your time is much appreciated, sir.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
The former Congressman Kevin Brady, who has been standing by for us. He, of course, used to represent Texas and was chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. Now he's spokesman for the Alliance for Competitive Taxation. Congressman, thank you very much for sticking with us here. I'm sure you heard the words of Senator Warner there, just talking about, frankly, the fact that it has required Democrats to get a lot of legislating done in this 118th Congress, and the 119th, when the House majority is even narrower. That may be true. So how much are you catering your messaging as well at the Alliance for Competitive Taxation to Democrats who may be required to get any kind of tax package over the finish line next year?
Yes, well, our messaging, more important, sort of the solutions we're advancing to keep America competitive, to make sure our companies can compete and win anywhere around the world, economic growth with a low corporate tax rate, and continuing to incentivize innovation in the U.S. Those are really bipartisan messages and bipartisan provisions, I think, within the tax code as Congress looks at it next year, in addition to keeping this growth and being able to counter China's super aggressiveness around the world. Certainly the middle class tax cuts the Republicans put in place, the new small business tax deduction, so important to Main Street, the child tax credit, and some of those business provisions like research and development they've already voted on in a bipartisan way. There is plenty of common ground for Congress if Democrats are willing to work with President Trump. They haven't on tax matters in the past. We'll see if they will or if it's needed. I think, again, a lesson from this early effort right now on passing a continuing resolution is that in a super thin majority, the president and Republicans, whichever party's frankly in power, has to work very carefully, very deliberately to make sure they've got those policies right and can advance them.
Well, and it's also a matter of sequencing here, sir. The man who now has the gavel that you once held in Ways and Means, Jason Smith, has been pretty adamant that he thinks if tax reform is going to pass, it needs to be included in one big budget reconciliation package, inclusive of other measures around the border, immigration, and energy as well, that's really the only way that this thing is going to get through the House. I wonder your thought on that, knowing that Donald Trump and the incoming Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, seem to still be advocating for trying to do two hard things at two separate times.
Yeah, so I think President Trump at some point is going to weigh in to sort of break the tie on the sequence. He's certainly, from holding that gavel at Ways and Means Committee, as you're doing a tax bill, you want all the factors that could be a leverage in bringing people to the table together. You want them in that single bill. So certainly Chairman Smith's proposal is a rational one. But regardless of whether it's one or it's two, I think one thing everyone needs to understand is it's a little like Mike Tyson's comments about heading into a fight. Everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth. Well, reconciliation is difficult and it's complex, and you can have the best plan in the world on paper, but until you sit down with your members of Congress on your committee in your conference, in the House and the Senate together, you don't really know where that sequencing is going to lead. And so I think, it's good to have the conversations they're having right now about which strategically would work best. But at the end of the day, as they begin to meet with these new members coming in, as well as existing conference, I think they will find a path. It'll become clear as they have those conversations.
Well, and as we have the conversation about kind of the government ledger here, if you will, with the spending on one side, the revenue on the other side with this tax conversation, we've had this conversation many times before, Congressman, about the notion that Donald Trump does think some of that revenue can be supplemented by revenue coming from tariffs. And I know you aren't all for that idea, but he did introduce a new tariff idea into the discussion early this morning. He posted on Truth Social that he told the European Union that to help make up for the deficit, the trade deficit with the United States, they have to purchase large-scale purchases of our oil and gas. Otherwise, he says, it is tariffs all the way. And so while I know you aren't a big fan of using that kind of income to increase revenue, are you a fan of it as for using it as leverage in a negotiation? Is that ultimately what you think this is?
Well, I hope so, in the sense that I think it's clear, President Trump's very clear. He believes tariffs work to our advantage in moving people to the table to have these conversations. In his priorities, obviously, border security, stopping drugs and fentanyl, stopping unfair trade practices, rebalancing trade, and getting the world to buy more U.S. oil, buy more U.S. products, help us stop Chinese transshipments, put pressure on Iran. I think he has a whole host, I think, of priorities, and he sees tariffs, or at least the threat and leverage of them, as a way to bring countries to the table. And I think we're all hopeful, because tariffs can be so damaging, usually more to the host country, like America, than it is to the other countries you're applying it to. And so, I think people are hopeful that that these conversations and this approach works to bring countries to the table, and we can find some common ground.
All right, sir, I know we've gone over time with you, so I just have one more question for you as a former member, a former leader within the House of Representatives. If you had a piece of advice for Speaker Mike Johnson now and as he heads into another speaker election just weeks from now, what would it be?
Well, I'll tell you, as a conservative, I will tell you, I'm a big admirer of Speaker Johnson. Again, I think he's taken the right approach. He listens very carefully. Certainly his word is good. And he's, again, one of the most conservative speakers the House has ever had, who respects the views of the entire conference. He knows how thin this a margin will be, not just today, but in the future. I will just tell you, I don't know that I have advice except to continue to be you, because the principles, integrity you bring, that office, that leadership, I think is exactly what we need right now.
All right, former Congressman Kevin Brady of Texas, now spokesman for the Alliance for Competitive Taxation. Thank you for being generous with your time today, sir. Very happy holidays to you and yours, and we'll look forward to touching base with you again in 2025.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts, or watch us live on YouTube.
As Republican lawmakers search for a Plan C, which they are hoping could be successful in averting a government shutdown when the clock strikes midnight tonight. What this Plan C will include kind of looks like what Plan B was, though Plan B failed in spectacular fashion on the House floor yesterday because it was a bill that put a lot of these things together. Didn't go so well because it included a 2-year extension of the debt limit. Instead, they want to split it up. Our understanding, at least at this hour, things could always change, as we've learned over the course of the last few days, is to divvy things up into 3 packages. One being a continuing resolution, a stopgap measure that will keep the government funded until mid-March. That's what needs to happen to avert a shutdown this weekend. Second part, aid for natural disasters. A lot of that targeted at the American Southeast, which is still recovering from multiple hurricanes that were devastating this year. Again, pretty popular measure. Then there's a 1-year extension of the Farm Bill, so aid for farmers and the agricultural sector. The question is going to be, if it is indeed going to be 3 bills, how quickly could they come to the floor, under a rule or under suspension of it? Because that's what will dictate how many members need to vote for it to pass and get sent to the Senate. So here with me now is our political panel today. Brittany Martinez is a Republican strategist and founder of Espina and Company. She's also a veteran of the House of Representatives, alongside Jeanne Zaino, Democratic strategist and senior democracy fellow for the Center of the Study of the Presidency and Congress. So, Brittany, we have an understanding of Plan C, at least at this hour. What we don't yet know is how exactly lawmakers are receiving it inside the conference room at this time. But a lot of lawmakers obviously have expressed upset with how Mike Johnson has handled it thus far. Can he put Humpty Dumpty, which is the Republican conference, back together again with this plan?
I mean, he's going to have to, or otherwise the government's going to close in just a few hours here. I think that, this is what sort of I'm hearing pushback from. Some folks are saying he should have just put up that first bill and bucked Trump. The problem with that, though, is that despite the Democrats being supportive of it and not whipping against it, it would have frustrated Trump and, the Republican Party. And though it would have passed and we wouldn't be in the situation right now, Trump's bill that he wanted yesterday also didn't pass. So though I think it's good to have individual bills. That's always what Republicans tout and want to do. In reality, when we're getting down to the 11th hour, and I don't think we literally have even 11 hours left before the government shuts down, that's not the best policy. But at this point, what choice do we have? I think that it might be successful, but you're probably going to have folks like members of the Freedom Caucus who still aren't satisfied. And I think we will probably hit a government shutdown, even if it only lasts for a day or two.
Well, if you're with us on Bloomberg TV, you see we got the shutdown clock up. So it's about 10 and a half hours left until the deadline right now for those listening on Bloomberg Radio. But Jeanne, I was just speaking a few moments ago with Democratic Senator Mark Warner of Virginia. And when I asked him, hey, what are you willing to vote for here to avert a shutdown? He basically said, we can't predict what's coming out of the House. I just wonder how you take that answer or what you're expecting really is the thinking from the democratically controlled Senate, which would be the next stop on this continuing resolution train.
Yeah, and it was such an important conversation you had with Senator Warner. And in particular, he echoed what we've been hearing from Democrats, which was his Pottery Barn theme. You break it, you buy it. And that's what Democrats feel that the Republican Party has done. And so they've got to own that. In terms of this three-step process, if that does indeed come out, it's going to depend on what's in there. Donald Trump tweeting in the middle of the night that maybe the debt ceiling should be raised for 4 years as opposed to 2 is going in exactly the opposite direction. If they're planning on something like that, Democrats won't go along with it. And quite frankly, they can't move forward, Republicans, because their own Republicans won't go along with it. And this speaks to a huge problem that the Republicans have. They have talked about fiscal responsibility, and yet they are supporting somebody who the Committee for Responsible Budget estimated has put forward plans during a campaign to raise the debt by $7.75 trillion. That was the moderate estimate that the committee put forward. How is that fiscally responsible? It is not. And that is what has driven this divide in the Republican Party. That is why you see Republicans very, very interesting. Donald Trump's not in office yet 38 Republicans last night, without fear, stood up and voted against him and Elon Musk. And that is a precursor of what is to come in this all Republican Washington, D.C.
Well, on the debt and deficit specifically, and the debt ceiling, which Donald Trump has said he wants to raise or abolish before he takes office, Jeanne, I would point out that Democrats have been calling to repeal the debt ceiling for a long time. Just last week, there was, I believe, 17 co-sponsors on a piece of legislation in the Senate that would have gotten rid of the debt ceiling. So is it really appropriate to be changing the two now, or is this actually an area in which Democrats and Donald Trump might be able to work together?
Well, they may be able to work together, but I'm so glad you raised that, because the difference is when Democrats want to raise or abolish the debt ceiling, which is fiscally sound and should happen, it is not for the narrow prospects that Donald Trump and Elon Musk put forward yesterday, which is so they can ram through an extension of the corporate and billionaires' tax cuts. That is what is adding to the deficit. That's why they can't get the support of people like Chip Roy. And so that is the problem they have. Yes, we need sound fiscal management in this country. And Elon Musk is absolutely right when he says we don't have it. The way to get it is not to shut down a bipartisan agreement hours before it goes through to keep the government open. And it is not to do so. Let's ask Elon Musk. He didn't oppose the defense spending bill the other day. Why not? Because he benefits from that. He did support the second bill that came forward, the CR, yesterday, once they stripped the China components out of that, because he benefits from it. So we have to think very carefully about who's benefiting from what. Yes, address the debt ceiling, but this is not the way to do that. And Donald Trump knows that, or at least the more, fiscally responsible members of his party do. And they have said they won't go along with this plan.
Well, as Jeanne alludes to Elon Musk here, Brittany, it does raise the question, as we've considered over the course of the last several days, whether or not Mike Johnson is going to be able to stay in the job as Speaker and keep the gavel in hand, how powerful the gavel really is, or if the Speaker of the House at this point is effectively someone who just has to act on behalf of the wishes of not just the president, but of the world's richest man.
I think that Speaker Johnson is a good guy. I think he's pretty common sense. He is a pretty conservative guy, but he also is able to come to the negotiating table and work with Democrats. And we've seen that time and time again, this Congress. It's going to be tough if Trump every time is trying to stop what he's doing. We saw that earlier this year, specifically with that immigration bill in the Senate, with Langford, how that was bipartisan, and then that got tanked because Trump said no. So I think that Trump is going to continue doing that sort of thing throughout his presidency, and it's going to make it really tough, not only for Senator Thune, but also especially for Mike Johnson, because he's got a slimmer majority.
Yeah, I think he's not exactly the envy of a lot of people in Washington right now. It's a pretty tough job that he's dealing with. It does raise the question why he even still wants to keep it, but we don't know anyone else who could get the vote. So I guess that's where we are at this moment. Brittany Martinez, founder at Espina & Company and Republican strategist, veteran of the Kevin McCarthy team in the House. Thank you so much for joining me. One half of our political panel, of course, the other being Jeanne Zaino, Democratic strategist and senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Thank you very much to you both for joining.
Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.